Imagine this. You wake up in your straw bed. Your neighbor is coughing blood, and a strange black swelling has appeared on your armpit. The year is 1348, and the plague is here. Your doctor, if you're lucky enough to find one, isn't reaching for medicine. He's reaching for an onion. In the darkest chapter of the Middle Ages, when the Black Death swept through Europe like a biblical curse, desperate remedies were everywhere. Bloodletting, leeches, even swallowing powdered emeralds. But one of the strangest and most widespread was the humble onion. To modern ears, it sounds absurd. But in a world with no microscopes, no antibiotics, and no idea what caused disease, this vegetable became a weapon of survival. So how did people in the Middle Ages fight the deadliest disease in human history? With food from their garden. Let's unravel the pungent truth. Before we talk onions, let's talk about the world they were trying to save. Europe in the mid-14th century was a fragile place, densely populated, deeply superstitious, and woefully unprepared for what was coming. The plague didn't start in Europe. Most historians agree it began in Central Asia, traveling along Silk Road trade routes. By 1347, it had boarded ships bound for Sicily, and then it spread, faster than any army, faster than any storm. With those ships came rats, and with the rats came fleas. Inside their bellies, Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. But nobody knew that. They blamed the stars, the air, and the wrath of God. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people, about 1/3 of Europe's population. Entire villages vanished. Families were buried in mass graves. And yet, people still tried to survive. In this grim world, physicians, both trained and self-proclaimed, offered hope. But medicine wasn't based on science as we know it. Instead, it was rooted in ancient texts, religious belief, and a curious obsession with smells. To understand why people turn to onions, we need to enter their mindset. Disease came from imbalance of humors, of airs, of sin. The body was a vessel easily corrupted, and anything foul-smelling might be just as deadly as the disease itself. The Middle Ages didn't have germ theory, but they had theories, and those theories shaped how they fought back. In the heart of darkness, onions seem to offer light. Before we judge their remedies, we need to understand their reasons. To a medieval mind, the Black Death was not a bacterium. It was a punishment, a mystery, a storm of divine wrath and earthly imbalance. Medicine in the 14th century was built on the theory of humors. Your health depended on the balance of 4 bodily fluids, linked to air, fire, water, and earth. Too much phlegm? You were cold and sluggish. Too much black bile? Melancholic. Diagnosing illness meant examining colors, of skin, of urine, of vomit. Smells, too, played a role. A foul odor wasn't just unpleasant. It was dangerous. Bad air, or miasma, was believed to carry disease through the nose and into the blood. Many believed the plague came from sin. God was angry. The stars had aligned in a cursed configuration. Or perhaps the air had become so rotten, so poisoned, that simply breathing it could kill. Astrology wasn't separate from medicine. It was medicine. Doctors tracked celestial movements to predict outbreaks. In 1348, the Paris medical faculty blamed the plague on the conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. Treatments flowed from these beliefs. If the body was out of balance, it must be purged, through bloodletting, vomiting, laxatives. If the air was poisoned, it must be blocked out with flowers, perfumes, or onions. So when a medieval doctor sliced open an onion and placed it beside a sickbed, he wasn't being foolish. He believed it could draw the poison out of the air, like a sponge soaking up death. Was it superstition? Certainly. But it was also adaptation, an early attempt to protect, cleanse, and control the invisible forces that haunted their world. It may sound absurd today, but during the Black Death, the humble onion became a household weapon against death itself.
Folk healers,
midwives, and desperate parents alike turned to nature for protection. Onions were sliced, crushed, soaked in vinegar, and placed near the sick on windowsills, under beds, even hung from ceilings like charms. The logic was simple. If bad air caused disease, then strong-smelling plants might absorb or repel it. Onions, garlic, sage, and rue, these weren't just seasonings. They were shields. Some recipes called for cooking onions with honey and wine to make a thick salve. Others mixed onion juice with vinegar and rosewater, meant to be dabbed onto skin, an early attempt at antiseptic, long before anyone knew the word. Even the infamous plague doctor, cloaked in black, masked like a crow, stuffed his beak with pungent herbs. It wasn't just symbolism. The belief was that the smell could ward off the poisoned air, and onions often featured in these aromatic mixtures. Others believed onions could draw out the sickness from the body. Tales spread of onions turning black after a night near a dying patient. To medieval minds, this was proof. The onion had absorbed the poison. We now know that bacteria don't leap into vegetables like spirits. But in a world with no microscopes, no vaccines, no germ theory, people grasped for anything that offered hope, however humble. The onion cure wasn't just medicine, it was ritual, a daily gesture of love and fear, and it reminds us that even in the darkest times, people reached for life with whatever they had. Not all plague cures were gentle. Some, in fact, were terrifying. As fear spread faster than the disease, so too did desperation, and with it, a grim parade of dangerous remedies. One of the most common treatments, bloodletting. Physicians believed the plague was an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, they thought, could kill you. To fix the imbalance, they cut veins, bled the sick. Sometimes, they applied leeches to draw out the bad blood. It was painful, weakening, and in many cases, fatal. Others turned to smoke and fire. If air was poisoned, they reasoned, then fire could purify it. Cities lit massive bonfires in public squares. People burned sulfur, pitch, or animal dung in their homes, filling the air with choking fumes in hopes of driving the plague away. But stranger remedies abounded. Some healers applied live animals to plague sores, frogs, snakes, even plucked chickens. The belief that the creature would suck out the disease. If the animal died, it was taken as proof the cure was working. No one stopped to question whether it had simply suffocated. The rich weren't spared strange remedies. Powdered jewels, emerald, sapphire, or coral were consumed as luxury medicine. Some even drank mercury or arsenic, thinking poison might fight poison. Quack remedies flourished. Snake oil salesmen, apothecaries, and holy men all peddled secret formulas. Unicorn horn, dragon's blood, distilled moonlight. No claim was too outlandish in the face of death. These weren't foolish people. They were desperate. And in a world where the best medical minds still believed in humors and miasmas, even the strangest cure made a kind of sense. Few of these remedies worked. Most did nothing. Some made things worse. But they reveal something powerful. How deeply humans cling to hope, even when science fails. In a time of darkness, when medicine failed and hope was scarce, many turned to the one source of comfort they still trusted: God. To the medieval mind, disease was not just physical, it was spiritual. The plague wasn't merely a sickness. It was a punishment, a test, a divine reckoning. In cities across Europe, strange new movements emerged. The flagellants believed that if they suffered enough, they could cleanse the world of sin and stop the plague. They marched through towns in grim parades, chanting hymns, beating their backs raw. Some believed they were holy. Others feared they brought more death. Church leaders called for repentance, fasting, public prayer. In some places, mass graves were dug beside cathedrals, and priests anointed the dying from a distance. But not all religious responses were grim. Many clergy, monks, nuns, and priests cared for the afflicted when no one else dared. They bathed the sick, buried the dead, and often died in the process. Hospitals, often run by religious orders, became sanctuaries. Though they lacked cures, they offered something else: comfort, place to die with dignity. Books of hours, plague prayers, and saints' charms circulated among the faithful. Saint Sebastian and Saint Roch became protectors against pestilence. Holy relics were kissed, carried, or worn around the neck. Miracles were hoped for. Some believed healing could come from touching the bones of a saint or lighting candles in their name. Prayer was not a cure, but it was a lifeline. In a time when doctors prescribed onions and bloodletting, the idea that suffering had meaning, that death was not the end, gave people strength. For the medieval world, religion wasn't just part of the response to the plague. It was the foundation, the final hope when all else had failed. When the Black Death came, people turned to the only experts they had, the doctors. But in the 14th century, a doctor could mean many things, and not all of them good. Some were university-trained scholars, learned men who studied Galen and Hippocrates. They wore robes, carried books, and spoke of humors and balance. But they had never seen anything like the plague. With no understanding of bacteria, their treatments were often guesswork. Bleeding, purging, herbal potions. They meant well but often made things worse. Others wore the now famous beaked masks. These weren't common at the time of the Black Death, but became iconic later. The beak held herbs and vinegar-soaked sponges to filter out the bad air. Not all doctors were learned. Some were charlatans, con men who sold fake cures and magical amulets. They roamed from town to town, preying on the desperate and the dying. Their kits were filled with strange things. Leeches, crushed emeralds, burnt toads, even powdered mummy. Some swore by unicorn horn or the ashes of swallows. For the wealthy, personal physicians offered constant attention, but their methods were often no better. Reputation mattered more than results. For the poor, there were fewer options. Local healers, midwives, or monks might offer help, if only out of charity. Sometimes their simple remedies worked better than any scholars. Medicine was a strange mix of science, magic, and hope. Astrology was consulted. Dreams were interpreted. Remedies were as likely to come from the stars as from a garden. And hygiene? Rarely considered. Tools weren't sterilized. Hands weren't washed. In trying to cure, many doctors unknowingly helped the plague spread. Still, some tried. They wrote, observed, recorded. They struggled to understand. In their own flawed way, they were the first to battle the invisible enemy. The doctors had their theories. The priests offered prayers. But what about the ordinary people, the farmers, bakers, weavers, and shepherds? When death came to their doors, how did they respond? Across Europe, villagers developed their own rituals and remedies. Some lit fires to cleanse the air. Others hung sweet-smelling herbs, lavender, rosemary, wormwood, near windows and doors. Folk wisdom guided their choices. Garlic, onions, and vinegar were believed to ward off sickness. Meals became more pungent, homes more fragrant, not just for taste, but for protection. Wise women and village healers played a crucial role. They weren't university-trained, but they knew the land and its cures. Poultices, teas, and tinctures passed down through generations. Play stopped. Gatherings ceased. People began to isolate centuries before the word quarantine was invented. Some fled the cities for remote hamlets. Others locked themselves in. In towns, entire households were boarded up. Red crosses were painted on doors. Bread and water were left outside by neighbors too afraid to knock. Superstition filled the gap science could not. People buried charms, wore amulets, drew protective symbols. In some places, they whispered prayers to saints. In others, they cursed the heavens. And yet, life went on. Animals needed tending. Fields had to be sown. Even amid fear, the rhythms of survival couldn't stop. Loss became constant. Entire families vanished. Children became orphans. Neighbors vanished overnight. And yet, the survivors adapted. They planted again, rebuilt, remembered. And despite no vaccines, no cures, no understanding of the disease, they endured. The story of the plague isn't just about death. It's about how ordinary people, armed with onions, hope, and stubborn resilience, faced the unthinkable and somehow kept going. The Black Death did not just scar a generation, it transformed the world. The legacy of the plague reached far beyond the millions of lives it took. In its shadow, a new era began. Entire villages vanished. Others were left with half their people gone. But with loss came unexpected shifts. Labor was suddenly scarce, and that scarcity gave workers, especially peasants, new leverage. For the first time in centuries, common people could demand more pay, more freedom. Serfdom began to crumble. In some places, it collapsed entirely. The church, too, had been shaken. Its prayers couldn't stop the plague. Its priests died alongside the poor. Trust fractured, and questions multiplied. From that doubt would rise reform and centuries later, revolution. In medicine, change was slower but inevitable. The horrors of the plague forced physicians to observe more, record more, and believe less in ancient dogma. Slowly, science began to stir. Education expanded. Towns invested in learning. People began to ask why disease spread, why some survived, why some didn't. Curiosity bloomed where fear had once reigned. Even in art and culture, the plague left its mark. Death appeared in poems, paintings, even dances. But so did hope, images of survival, healing, and divine mercy. Today, we live in a different world, but echoes remain. We still wash our hands, quarantine sick rooms, question authority. We owe these instincts not just to science, but to history. The plague taught us resilience. It showed us how fear can isolate, but also unite. How communities can collapse or come together. And perhaps the most humbling lesson of all. Even in the darkest moments, people will still search for cures, be they in onions, prayers, or hope itself. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, and never underestimate the wisdom of those who came before us.